Well, good morning and welcome to the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. I'm Michael Benner, and I'm always happy to be here. This is one of the high points of my week. We're going to continue with our discussion of the wisdom traditions of the world, otherwise known as mysticism, though as I mentioned briefly last week, Buddhism is an example of a wisdom tradition that probably is not considered part of mysticism. But all of these schools and branches of philosophy obviously have their distinctions, their differences. We're looking at a larger conceptual view and an overarching concept of what the wisdom traditions are. And again, mysticism is a pretty good synonym for wisdom traditions. It's a school of philosophy, as we discussed last week, that emphasizes personal experience and the ecstatic states of deep relaxation and profound peace. That's where awareness is expanded, so-called higher consciousness, where we have a much more profound insight and understanding. You're much more likely in a deeply relaxed, meditative or contemplative state to have those revelations, those little epiphanies, the aha illumination, maybe you know it that way, of that sudden burst of awareness, like, oh my God. I love the phrase that the writer Joseph Chilton Pearce used when he wrote Cracked in the Cosmic Egg, which was thoughts that arrive full blown. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that a wonderful phrase? Thoughts that arrive full blown. They just burst into your awareness, already conceived, already figured out, so to speak, better said, already realized, as if on some other level, and then they burst into awareness like a flash of light, of enlightenment, of illumination. And sometimes it's quite thunderous, like lightning, and lid lifting, just a complete the top of your head blows off. Sometimes, the archetype of the light bulb coming on, and suddenly you see what you had not seen. It was there all along, you just didn't see it. Sometimes it's the dawning of an idea. The realization, the epiphany, the illumination comes up slowly like a sunrise. And oh, wait a minute, hold on. I'm starting to see what you're talking about. An awareness that apparently was within me on some unconscious level, but only now, due to this deep relaxation, the calming of the waters, so to speak. Only when the mind is undisturbed, like a glass lake, are you able to see deeply into it, as well as what's reflected on the surface. And this, in many traditions, is called the Buddhist tradition primarily is called Vipassana, with a V like Victor, Vipassana. And sometimes it's just called, especially in the West, insight meditation. So we could also use the word intuition, which is very different than instinct, something we've talked about in the past. Instinct is really what to avoid. Oh no. It's based at the root of the spine, the root chakra. Whereas intuition is heart-based, isn't it? That's, oh boy, that's what to move toward. People use these terms interchangeably, but they really are polarities of the so-called gut feeling. That's really the language of emotions and the portal to spirituality. So, having quickly delineated last week the different mystery schools, from Rosicrucianism to Gnosticism, we talked about theosophy a little bit and anthroposophy, and again, Taoism and Buddhism, and the mystical traditions in Christianity should not be overlooked. They're really not limited to Rosicrucianism or Freemasonry, but Judeo-Christian traditions have their mystical schools, their mystery schools as well. It's often these devoted priests and nuns who were targeted during the Inquisition, which is ongoing, by the way. The Catholic Church still has an office of Inquisition. They just haven't burned any witches recently or put any believers on the rack to torture them. But still have a school of Inquisition. And again, one of the primary differences with mysticism as compared to organized religion is that there's no one right way to look at things. We're encouraged to emphasize experience. You read all the books, you read good literature, the scriptures, and the non-holy but personal development, spiritual development literature. You be a good reader. Look for diverse and antagonistic books. The ones that contrast can teach you as much or more as the ones that reinforce and agree. Logic is very important. You don't see that in organized religion. An emphasis on critical thinking. But in addition to the reading and the critical thinking, there is this emphasis on personal experience. And that's why prayer and meditation and the whole idea of these blissful, deeply peaceful, profound, loving, even ecstatic states are emphasized. Having said that, let's do our opening meditation, and we'll see where we go with that. Put ourselves in the right frame of mind, open up our hearts and our willingness to be mindful in the moment, and then we'll come back with today's instruction. And of course, about an hour from now, 5 or 10 minutes after noon, California time, we'll do some Q&A. So hopefully you will, throughout the class today, have in mind some comments or questions that you can put in the chat box, and we'll have Melinda read those to you later. So, sit up straight, whether you're in a chair or sitting cross-legged on your bed or sofa, a meditation pillow in the formal yoga position, doesn't matter. Most of us are just sitting in a chair. We're Westerners. But get balanced and centered. Think of yourself as sitting straight but not rigid. You want your head over your shoulders, shoulders back, your torso sitting nicely balanced above your hips, feet flat on the floor. Feel your connection through the floor to the earth below. Feel grounded and connected. You're not separated. In spite of appearances, we are not separated from anything. Close your eyes and take 2, 3, even 4 nice, slow, deep breaths, inhaling ideally through the nose. Unless you have a stuffy nose, breathe in through the nose, hold as you peak, and as you exhale through the nose or the mouth, just as slowly, feel a letting go feeling in your body. And then repeat that a couple of times, pulling in strength and power as you inhale, fill your lungs. And as you exhale, create and sense a letting go. Muscles unwinding, sort of softening, even a feeling of melting a little bit. That proceeds as you take a couple of more slow, deep breaths. Feel the letting go. Inhaling the good, clean, pure air. Exhaling as if it were black, oily smoke, the stress and tension, the worries and doubts that we carry. It's not unlike going to sleep, but you're going to float right in the middle between wide awake and deep sleep. And your mind begins to slow. Allow my voice to carry you as you become deeper, more relaxed, feeling yourself softening like butter on a warm day, yielding to the natural feeling of deep peace and relaxation. Reassuring all parts of the brain and the mind that you're safe. And by this time, you've allowed your breathing to return to normal. Turn your breathing over to autopilot. Let your body breathe itself. In fact, lift your awareness to the bottom of your nose, wherever it settles, tip of the nose, that septum, that cartilage between the nostrils, or just inside the rim of the nostrils, whatever feels most natural and comfortable for you. And allow your awareness to settle there as you observe from this point, from this singularity, the natural and normal breathing of your body. And most importantly, you identify as the witness, the observer, rather than the breather. You acknowledge that you are not purposefully, deliberately breathing. You did that a minute ago with the slow, deep breaths, but acknowledge that you let go of that. And noticing that the body breathes itself. So you sort of step back and allow your body to breathe itself. I am the witness. I am the observer. I am the watcher. I need do nothing, but instead allow myself to be. To be a witness of my breathing, of the body breathing itself, but also a witness of my life unfolding, all by itself. How much of our need to manage and control our lives are you willing to release? To what extent are we willing to accept the unfolding of life on its own? And that acceptance does not render us helpless, but allows us to sit in a position where we're more aware and better able to choose our responses. So acceptance is simply acknowledging the reality of the present moment as it unfolds, as it blossoms, without a need to fix, change, repair, replace, modify, improve. Though you could do any of those things, you could decide later, I can do better at this. I have more choices in this area than I considered. Maybe when I don't know what to do, it's best just not to do anything. And if I'm not sure what to say, maybe just not say anything. Acceptance is a beginning, you see, not the end of things. Acceptance is not surrender. It's acknowledging reality. And reality, your personal reality, unfolds on its own. It does not need to be micromanaged. We benefit from conscious, deliberate decisions made from the countless choices that occur to us as our awareness expands in levels of deep relaxation. Say to yourself silently and internally, just as I witness my body breathing itself, I witness my life unfolding all by itself, without any aid or assistance from me. Just as it is. For the clarity, the deep insight, the profound understanding that arrives when we sit quietly for a time. Notice the shift. And if and when your mind wanders, you find yourself distracted for any reason or for no reason, bring your awareness back to your breathing. Notice you're still breathing. As you allow my voice to go with you. In the United States, this is Thanksgiving week. We may think of it as a holiday of feasting, for it is that. But the feast is a celebration of the abundance of life, not only in material ways, but of the energy, the spirit, the love, the wisdom that is life itself, beyond material form. We are grateful that we exist through awareness, that we are able not only to comprehend, but to reflect on that which we perceive. To think about thinking, or to watch our thoughts without judging. To reflect on our feelings and consider them, but also to simply acknowledge their presence without judgment. And consider also the wonderful ability that we have to release reflexive behavior and replace it with conscious, deliberate, and purposeful responses chosen from an array of possible responses. Take a moment to express silently and internally your heartfelt gratitude for your family and your friends, those closest to you. A kind of a group hug. Embrace them spiritually. And acknowledge that appreciation. Be grateful for the miracle that is life itself. The fact that the world works, though often inelegantly when humans get involved. But consider nature as she unfolds and evolves, and what beauty we see in nature. The landscapes, the panoramas, the canyons, the rivers, the mountains, the oceans, the sky, the clouds, the stars, the moon, the miracle of the seasons, and evolution itself, the continuing unfolding of our potential. Be grateful for that. Acknowledge the miracle that is so often overlooked in our busy, busy life and affairs. Acknowledge your ancestors, your parents and grandparents, but also those who come before. Going back beyond description, beyond the great grandparents or the great grandparents, hundreds, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. You are a product of their love and their lives, of the difficulties and sacrifices of ancestors who had to scratch and claw just to stay alive, gathering up whatever they could to stay alive, to build shelters, to live in caves, and how each generation taught the following generation their acquired knowledge, and that generation added to it and passed it on, and so, and so, and so. Imagine what you probably never even thought of before, that there are thousands of ancestors whose love and desire to bring children forth are responsible for you being here today in form. And what a blessed opportunity it is to be alive in this marvelous day and age. In our lifetimes, we've seen more change, more improvement. more wonderful technology, but also more wisdom than any who've gone before us. And yes, the world is often frightening and chaotic, corrupt, indecent, filled with fear and anger, hostility, violence, hatred. All opportunities for us to redeem the negative with kindness and love, gratitude, compassion, empathy, wisdom, the truth of being. For there is no religion higher than truth. And then allow your gratitude to expand out in the present moment to the 8 billion human beings that are alive today on this earth. Statisticians tell us in just the last week that we have passed 8 billion human beings. Arguably more people on the earth today than have ever lived in the 3 million years that human beings have populated this planet. 8 billion souls, 8 billion brothers and sisters with the same passions and the same desires, the same hopes and dreams as you and I. Send your gratitude and your love radiating out like ripples in a pond, like a radio signal emanating out to embrace the world with your love and light. Not only the people, but all of the animals, all of the pets, all of the domestic and farm animals and the ranches, all of the wild animals, from the noble and regal beasts to the insects, right down to the microbes, for all are expressions of life, and life is love and wisdom and truth. And allow that love and light, to whatever degree you can imagine it, spreading to the corners of the universe, all inclusive, without condition, without judgment, because you are. As humans, we are not the source of this love, but a medium or channel. For love comes not from us, but through us. To whatever degree we're willing to offer it up freely, without condition, to all that exists, to all who exist. Existence is our family. Gratitude is a thank you. It's an appreciation. The mystics have taught us from all cultures that if the only prayer we ever said, the only affirmation we ever uttered was thank you, that would be enough. And by the way, almost as an afterthought, Consider the degree or extent to which you as an individual benefit from this expression of gratitude without condition, without differentiation to all that is. Be the peace, be the love, be the compassion, be the light. Let's prepare to come back to the waking state in 3 simple steps. 1, simply form the intention. Transition. By first forming the intention to return to the waking state. 2, feel a gentle rising up as you awaken naturally, without alarms and such, slowly rising, almost like floating upward toward the waking state. And 3, eyes open, wide awake, back in the room, wide awake, feeling much better than before, deeply rested. Take a deep breath, maybe a little stretch, like waking up, feeling better and better. Happy Thanksgiving. My favorite holiday, that's for sure. Yeah, I like the feast, but I like the whole sense of getting together with family and friends. And gosh, we should be grateful also we're on the other side of this pandemic, except we're really not, are we? It's now endemic. It'll be with us always. So we have to be careful. We have to be aware. Okay, so as promised, let's look at the wisdom traditions of the world and the basic suppositions. Hannah, if you'll bring up that share, thank you. These are, this is the document that we shared last week, and if you were not able to be here, or if you're listening to the audio podcast, you're not seeing anything, of course, but here, those of us who are here live or watching the YouTube video, you'll see in this first paragraph here the list we went over last week. That's as far as we got. We spent 35 minutes on that first paragraph. And I think we read down just a little below that. Given my vision, I'm going to need to zoom in a little. Oh, not that far, Michael. There we go. So let's begin with the line that says, some of the basic principles of the ageless wisdom include, and we'll work our way down through this bullet point list. Now, again, these are principles, or as I described them in the newsletter yesterday, suppositions. If you're not familiar with the word, certainly you know the word suppose. Well, I don't know. I suppose that's, that's the root verb in supposition. Supposition would be the noun. A supposition is something you suppose, but you're uncertain of. And in matters of spirit and spirituality, and even to a large extent psychology and philosophy, we're always dealing with unprovable principles or tenets. Scientific method is difficult to apply. Empirical science doesn't really apply to the invisible and the unseen. The instrument we use to measure spirit is our own consciousness. But there are agreements, there are suppositions, there are precepts or ideas that these mystery traditions share. Again, above and beyond organized religion and the institutions of religion. So let's go through some of them. The first one, I think, in no particular order, maybe there's something of an order here, but this is really not linear. The first bullet point is a unified energy source of all things, known as spirit. I think it's interesting to note that the word spirit means breath. Also, having lived in Hawaii for 5 years, I can tell you, aloha means the breath of God. Aloha is much more than hello, goodbye, I love you, or thank you. It's everything. Aloha. You notice, perhaps when I end this class, I say, Namaste, Aloha, Salam. I could add Shalom, which is really Salam. And again, those words are rich in their connotations and the deep meaning. Even in the Judeo-Christian, the Hebrew Bible, used by Jews and Christians, the so-called Old Testament, it says in Genesis, in the beginning was the Word. Well, the Word, you have to breathe to speak a word, right? So the first step of manifestation is to speak your affirmation. But there's breath behind that. So spirit, to the ancients around the world, the shamans of all cultures, they'd never met each other. They didn't know each other. Couldn't hop on an airplane 10,000 years ago. Yet they all came up with pretty much the same sense that there is a unified energy. This is why many people think that the monotheistic impression that we see on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, or there have even been sculptures made of God the Father. And is this not blasphemy? Is this not idolatry? Is this not a graven image? To visualize the divine source of all things, the Creator, the Absolute, as a human being on a cloud very far away. It leads to a feeling of abandonment often, or alienation at the very least, of separation and a concern about whether I'm good enough. My goodness. Am I adequate? How many of our fears are rooted in inadequacy? Not that we know that we're inadequate, but we get a lot of messages from organized religion that we're made in the image of that which is divine, and yet we're very, very bad. We're sinners. You're born a sinner. It's not your fault. But it's still your responsibility to redeem your evil nature, and here are the rules, here are the laws, here's how you do it. Well, maybe so, maybe not. But everybody seems to agree that behind the veil, so to speak, beyond material stuff, physical, dense, solid, liquid, gases, is some sort of energy. And Einstein put the equal sign between energy and matter and said, all that you see is a form of energy. It's just condensed. It's energy that is at its lowest vibration, and it congeals or condenses. That's a great word. In alchemy, they talk about the 3 steps of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. That's an interesting cycle to ponder, isn't it? I don't want to get too far afield, but evaporation, condensation, precipitation. Maybe that applies not only to water, but a process by which spirit, the life force, the ki, the chi, the kundalini, the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, condenses and then precipitates into physical form. So here's a grand consensus that ultimately everything is spiritual, and that this is a unified energy that is the source of all things. Ultimately eternal, infinite, unchanging, and self-shining. This comes out of Eastern philosophy more than monotheism. And to be clear, monotheism is Abrahamic religion, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the Eastern wisdom says if something is real, in order for anything to be ultimately real, it must be eternal, infinite, unchanging, and self-shining. We know the physical world, the world of appearance, the world of form, has none of these qualities. The law of impermanence rules in physical dance. Everything changes. Not only does it change, not only is the world in constant flux, but it decays, it erodes, it peters out, it runs out of steam. It rots, it decays, it rusts, it corrodes, it goes away. I had a major revelation when I was a young man, and actually I was in therapy. I was in my late 20s, and I was doing therapy to try to untangle the dysfunctional childhood that I had experienced. And at one point I heard my mother's voice in my head saying, "Michael, if you take care of this, it'll last forever." And I know she was well-intentioned, but I had to come to terms with the fact that that's not true. Because I really tried to take care of things. I tried to, clean the house. I tried to keep the car washed. I tried to, do the gardening and make things look nice for me and other people. I tried to care for my possessions, but just like the battery runs out, sooner or later something breaks. Then you learn as you get even older that that's sort of intended, that the manufacturers of objects that we long for, that we desire, build this obsolescence in deliberately. So see how far you can go without upgrading the operating system on your computer. And you'll find out that sooner or later, you got to upgrade the operating system, and sooner or later, you got to buy a new computer. And even if your cell phone works fine, sooner or later, you got to upgrade it. And, there's a new model of AirPods. I got to get that for no reason. We're going to do some classes on the desire nature and the fact that it's never fulfilled. If you stay tuned for that, I promise. So, very important to accept, especially since we are bombarded daily with commercials and advertising that emphasize the fact that you can actually own something, that you can acquire it and possess it. And it's really not true. Everything is on loan from the universe. That brand new car you spent $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on. I don't care if you wash it every week and wax it every month. No matter how conscientious you are, that car, like the house you live in and the tallest skyscrapers in the world, will eventually be razed to the ground and end up in the landfill, just as the form in which that we inhabit, our own physical bodies, must return to the clay of the earth. And we're in denial about that. And we call that reality. Physical dense is not reality according to this definition. It's not eternal. It's not infinite. It's not unchanging. And what is this self-shining? What does that mean? It's the radiance of divinity. It's this miraculous, I'll even say unreasonable concept, a kind of a violation of physics, just as the perpetual motion machine would be a violation of physics. Energy is used up, it has to be created, and then it gets used up, and there can be no perpetual motion in the physical dense world. But the rishis and the sages, the avatars and the prophets say, yeah, but beyond this veil of objectivity in solid form is a radiance such that the absolute can create the relative. The creator can create its creation without being diminished or even changed in an infinite and eternal way. That's what self-shining refers to, that the one creates the many, energy creates mass without being diminished or consumed. And even in the physical world, the laws of physical science say, yeah, everything erodes, decays, rots, eventually goes away. But energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's the invisible and unseen that is truly substantial. Isn't that remarkable? It's the invisible and unseen. It's energy that is the substantial side of the equation, and the material form out of which it comes is impermanent. So even in Einstein's equation, and I'm not sure if this is why, I've never heard anybody talk about it, but if you look at Einstein's equation, if everybody could double check that they're muted, somebody is not muted and it's coming through. Thanks for that. Even physics says energy cannot be created or destroyed. And yet all the physical world, as I've said, is in decay. All right, let's continue on the sentence. In fact, let me get a running start. This first bullet point, that reality includes, certainly the wisdom traditions include, a unified energy source of all things, so-called spirit, that is ultimately eternal, infinite, unchanging, and self-shining, yet which is both immanent and transcendent. Notice this word is not immanent, I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T. That would be about to happen. It's imminent, it's pending, it's going to come down at any time. This is immanent, which means inherent, innate, or within. And transcendent is the complement, free of form, above, transcending, rising above, free of form. So what does it mean that spirit is immanent and transcendent? It means the energy that is this life force, this Holy Spirit, this chi or ki or kundalini or prana, is both indwelling but not limited to within. It's as if everything is in us. Everything, the one, I'll say it this way, the one is in everything, but the transcendent is everything is in the one and more. It's a little cryptic, but it merits some reflection. The one life, divinity, the creator, the absolute, is in every seemingly separated thing, and, that's immanent, and Every seemingly separated form is in the one. And yet the one is not limited to that. So there's more immanent and transcendent. And a couple of months ago when we touched on this, I told you it's the definition of panentheism. Wonderful term. Learn panentheism. It is not pantheism. Pantheism is half of the equation, that God is nature, that divinity, spirit is in everything, right? So the snake is holy. It's not evil. And the cockroach is just as sacred as the noble beasts, the lion or the eagle. And that divinity is in the rivers and the mountains and the sky and the air that we breathe, and every scintilla, every cell in your body is imbued with this energy. How could it? It's all inclusive. In other words, everything is sacred. Everything is sacred in the wisdom traditions. You won't find that in organized religion, regardless of the religion. Organized religion, all religions seem to be based on an idea of good and evil. It's very binary. And this is not to deny the existence of so-called evil, which is the word live, backward, very strange. Don't know if that's a coincidence or not. It's just that a metaphysician or a student of the wisdom is more likely to see evil not as an opposing force, but as the absence of good. Have you ever considered that? Like light and shadow. You would say, well, in terms of the language and the way we use language, that's an example of opposites. Light and shadow, or hot and cold. They're opposites, right? So they must be opposing forces. Well, ask yourself, is darkness a force? Is cold a force? You might say, yeah, I remember once when it was very cold and very dark, and it felt very scary. I felt the presence of evil in the darkness, and I was shivering. Of course, they're forces. No, they're not forces. Light is a force because we can assign a definition to it. In other words, light has a speed. We know the speed of light, 186,000 miles an hour. Light has a speed. Does darkness have a speed? Well, of course not. Darkness doesn't proceed at a given speed. Light also has a source. We can find the source of the light. Is it the sun? Is it the moon? Full moon, there's moon shadows. A lamp, a fire, a candle. What's the source of darkness? Whoa. Wait a minute. Darkness has no source. It just is. It just is what? The absence of light. So light's real, darkness is the absence of that energy. Same thing with hot and cold. I remember, I go back to my mom again. She used to say, we lived in Michigan, got cold as hell. Did you see Buffalo, New York got 7 feet of snow? My God, 7 feet, can you imagine? Well, having grown up in Michigan, right on the lake, we have that same lake effect as Buffalo and southwestern Michigan, where I grew up. And we had a lot of snow, and it got cold in the winter. And often my mother would say to me, Michael, because I'd dilly-dally, I'd come in the door and then take my boots off. And, close the door, you're letting the cold in. And I think I was probably in junior high in the science class one day when I figured, well, I realized I understand what my mom is saying, but again, she's got it backwards. I was letting the heat out. I wasn't letting the cold in. I was letting the heat out. How does a refrigerator make it cold? Have you ever thought about that? What does a refrigerator do to make it cold inside? It doesn't generate cold. It just pumps out the heat, and what's left is the absence of heat. So if darkness is the absence of light, and cold is the absence of heat, doesn't it make sense that evil is the absence of good and not a force that struggles? I think we've been misled by ancients, Bronze Age philosophies, thousands of years old, where they just didn't understand these things. So we have to update our philosophies and our desires to understand the world, not only physically, but metaphysically, as we become wiser about such things. Evil definitely exists. There's no question. I don't think I'd get an argument from any of you about that. There is evil in the world, but it is not a force. It is the absence of love and light and wisdom and truth and goodness and beauty. So one of the most powerful ways to fight evil is to redeem it with love. You don't extinguish it. You don't kill evil. You don't conquer it. You don't defeat it. You embrace it, and it ceases to be. You confront it. You send love and compassion and gratitude. It's Thanksgiving week. We did that meditation on gratitude. And evil cannot stand in the presence of that. It's sort of like the allegory of the crucifix and the vampire, right? That evil cannot exist in the presence of the light that Christ brought as his wisdom. All right. And then there's an M dash, and the sentence continues, the one in the many, Jung's collective unconscious, panentheism, and then a couple of other words we haven't talked much about, which is panpsychism and monism. See, we're going to do it again. We're going to spend a whole class on one paragraph. Panpsychism. You can Google this. You can look it up in the dictionary, just like panentheism. Distinguish panentheism from pantheism, which is half of what panentheism suggests. Panpsychism and monism are very closely related, and somebody who was really, really good at philosophy and the wisdom traditions, much better than me, could tell you exactly how these differ. My point of view, my mission really is to break a lot of this stuff down so it's more accessible, and they overlap to such a large degree that I'm not going to focus on what distinguishes or separates these concepts. The old wisdom phrase of the one in the many. Jung's collective unconscious, above and free of form, the idea that we're all plugged in, we're all connected on some level. How else do you explain telepathy and remote viewing and clairvoyance and precognition and synchronicities, which is a Jungian term, but through the idea that we're all plugged into the same terminal or switchboard on some level, and that group, that collective unconscious, stands between the one and the many, between the divine and its manifestation, between creator and creation, is this collective, the one, the group, and the many. Souls are never alone. Only human beings are alone. Souls are in ashrams or groups Remember the Led Zeppelin album, Houses of the Holy? That's what that's a reference to, the ashrams in which the soul is said to live. So you have a family of souls. And also, when you hear accounts of people reincarnating with the same individual, or just if you've ever had the experience of meeting someone and feeling like you know them, you recognize them. It's an uncanny feeling of, why have I met you someplace? No. Well, it sure feels like it. So maybe you were lovers, partners in one lifetime, your brother and sister in another lifetime. You're a boss and an employee in another lifetime. Just working it out. You share an ashram. Your souls are part of a group. The one, the group, and the many. But to get back to panpsychism, this is the idea that there is a universal mind that is shared by each and every manifestation of that one life, that one thing. That everything has a mind. That on some level it thinks and it feels. And I don't have the time today to get into it, but if you go way back in well, not that far back, maybe 8 months or so, in my YouTube channel, Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, you'll see a radio interview that I did. It's posted right there in the same channel with a fellow named, what was it? Stuart, was it Hoffman or Goldman? Something like that. Spacing on his name right now. But he is a medical doctor, an anesthesiologist, and chairman of the Department of Consciousness Studies at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And they're doing research on the consciousness of plants, in particular the Venus flytrap, and its level of awareness, the degree to which a Venus flytrap is conscious, sitting there with its mouth wide open, waiting for a housefly or a mosquito or a gnat to come into its lair, and then bang, it shuts, and it's a carnivore. It's a plant that's a carnivore. It eats critters. How does it know? And he said a plant is conscious. Even slime mold is conscious. I have a section in my book, Fearless Intelligence, where I talk about the research with slime mold. These are single-celled, tiny little one-celled creatures. Obviously with no brain, no nervous system, no nerves, no nothing, just a little teeny tiny packet of protoplasm. But they are aware, they're conscious, and they have been shown. I even saw a YouTube video of this, a time-lapse photo of slime mold learning to solve the shortest path to food in a microscopic maze problem. And the slime mold learned the shortest path through the maze to get to the food, and passed that knowledge on to its offspring. And this experiment has been repeated and repeated. And what this doctor told me was that their research shows that a single-celled animal, like an amoeba, paramecium, this slime mold, very much like a plant, the vegetable kingdom, is conscious maybe 2 frames per minute. You know how a movie runs 24 frames per second? Well, imagine taking one of those frames out. That represents 1/24th of a second. Well, we're conscious at a level of millions or billions of frames per second. So we don't see it as a series of snapshots, just like a movie. 24 frames a second is sufficient to make it look smooth and We call film movies because people move. Well, imagine that kind of streaming of consciousness, a series of very rapid snapshots of awareness that in humans, again, are millions or billions of times per second, but a plant or a little single cell creature, it may be 1 or 2 frames per minute, not per second, but per minute. It's aware of its environment on a much lower level. I think that's fascinating. But panpsychism is a term for everything has a mind, some aspect of mind. And monism, as distinguished from monotheism, again, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which mono means one, obviously, so the monotheistic idea is there's one creator, one God that is separate from its creation, living outside, very far away, accessible only by prayer, whereas monism says, no, it's all one thing, one life. There is no separation. Think about it. Everything is connected to everything. So all of the Eastern philosophies and religions are monistic rather than monotheistic. So that's as much as we have for today, honey. You can release that. Thank you for that. And so let's go to the Q&A and see if we can engender some comment or some question. And that'll take us to the bottom of the hour. Melinda, do you see anything in chat yet?
No, I don't. I bet somebody will come up with something. You can either raise your hand or type it in. I just wanted to ask you, pantheism implies a separation, I guess, of the creator imbuing themselves, himself, herself. But panentheism is more it's seamless. There's no difference.
Yeah.
They seem, the semantics gets a little hard to translate into concepts because these concepts are kind of amorphous.
Yeah. Pantheism is the immanent side of the equation. Pantheism, if a religious fundamentalist uses the word, it's with great contempt, virtually equating it with Satanism. That's what makes it fundamental. They're very reactionary in nature. Again, the idea that God is nature, that the cockroach is as holy as the human being in their potential, in their existence as an extension or a fragment or an element of that which is divine, that all of nature is sacred. And Christians, of course, spit that out of their mouth. No, you're talking about Jesus, and only Jesus is divine. You're not divine, even though Jesus said, "You're all children of the Most High, and these things I do, you can do and more." They overlooked that part. It's cherry picked. We're not gonna look at that. Just like we won't look at the part in the Bible that says slaves should obey their masters. We're not going to talk about that.
Right. I do see that Hanif has his hand raised.
Good. Let me finish on that, and I'll go to Hanif. Sure. So that's pantheism, and then panentheism is pantheism plus the obverse, which is everything is in the one. The one is in everything, and every seemingly separated thing is unified by its wholeness, by being in the one. In other words, the physical universe and everything in it is the body of God. Right? So panentheism is both directions, moving in both ways. The divine is in everything mundane, and everything mundane is in the transcendent. That's panentheism. Okay, Hanif. Can you unmute?
Yeah.
There we
Michael,
go.
first of all, thank you for what you do, and thank you for an excellent meditation today.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm looking for, last week you talked about theosophy with a smaller T and a capital T.
Right.
Can you maybe, guide us to some literature or some information where I could get a little more in-depth understanding of it? I tried to use Professor Google, but couldn't come up with much on that.
You tried to use what?
Professor Google.
Oh, if theosophy was, I don't think Google respects capital letters. So you probably came up with a lot of the Blavatsky stuff, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. I would look at Rhineland Mystic. Google Rhineland. That's Rhineland. Rhineland.
Okay.
That's the area around the Rhine River, which is, forgive me, somewhere in Europe, maybe in Germany, Austria, Bavaria, somewhere. I'm not sure where the Rhine River is. But the Rhineland mystics go back to the 13th and 14th century, and they were Christians, mostly monks, that were willing to risk disfavor of the Vatican and its Inquisition, and in some cases were imprisoned and tortured and burned at the stake, even though they were priests. But they were mystics. They were more interested in the Christ than in Jesus the man. Divine though he may be, again, arguably, what isn't divine? All things are divine. Even the most evil people have a soul. It's hard to believe sometimes. But they managed to bury it under all manner of fear. So the Rhineland mystics called themselves Theosophists. I think they were not completely, but I think that's the derivation of the word with a small t. The mystics of the, it's pre-Renaissance. It's 13th, 14th century. And see what you come up with in terms of the small t Theosophist if you Google Rhineland mystic. And then the capital T Theosophists are the 19th century, beginning in the 1800s with Blavatsky's organization. And then that's, as I mentioned last week, split into two when Krishnamurti came out and said, no, I'm not the Maitreya, I'm not the Messiah, I'm just some guy. And
Michael, Jack has
yeah.
a question, just to let you know. Jack has something to say, and then Patrick does too, just to let you know.
Good, great.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Hanif. Let me know what you come up with.
I will.
All right. Jack.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I wanted to thank you about what you said about force and not force.
Yeah.
Because it put a little more light on something that I've argued about, which is a bit of a popular philosophy that I hear when people say things like that good and evil are in some way equal because you have to have evil to have good, or at least you have to experience evil to have good, or you have to have hate in order to have love. And I would say, well, that's absolutely not true. They're not really, they're kind of experiential opposites, but they're not existential or fundamental opposites.
Slow down. You're that's a big bingo, man. To distinguish those two, how did you just say it? Experiential as opposed to?
A fundamental or existential opposites.
That's just beautiful, man. Go further with that. Explain that.
Well, the example I would give is that for sort of hate and love, a child experiences its mother's love quite easily, and it doesn't experience it any better if the mother starts slapping the child. Right. And in fact, it becomes confused if that happens, and then love becomes confused, and it's harder to experience love. So, I guess in a sense, we experience hate and anger and things as forces, but they're not fundamental because they don't come from the deep truth. They come from a lack of understanding of the deep truth, that love is fundamental.
In fact, many have said, including Leo Tolstoy, he said, love is the only thing there is.
Hmm.
And yet we see, as you said, in our experience of the world, we see the role of the antithesis. I think it was Francis Bacon who said diamonds appear brightest against a black background.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King, I think, said something similar about if it were not for the dark, you would not see the stars. So a painter or a photographer who works with light appreciates the value of shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, to argue that, well, you can't really perceive without that contrast between light and shadow, or hot and cold, or good and evil. And so both things are true. In form, in the experience of living, these appear to be, if not opposites, polarities.
Yeah.
That may be a better way of saying it, because polarities are two sides of the same coin, and they don't struggle. They don't struggle against each other. Usually, binary thinkers, because binary thinking is a product of anxiety and fear, will see them not as polarities, not as having a healthy relationship, yin and yang, for example, but as opposing forces like a football team. And somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. And, you know, if you're from LA, then well, we don't have a football team anymore, do we, in LA? The Rams? I don't follow football, forgive me. If you're in LA, the Dodgers, I'll go to baseball, the Dodgers are the good guys and the Angels are the bad guys. But boy, if you're in Orange County, it's just the opposite. And opposing, struggling against is very different from polarities. But yeah, thanks for that. That's really nice. Did you want to go on? I sort of interrupted you there.
Only that I guess what I was really arguing against with people is to sort of equate these things as equal. Good and evil are not equal.
Yeah, they're yeah.
And good is not really dependent upon evil for its existence. You don't really need demons to have angels, you know,
Exactly.
mythologically speaking, but they make a better story. And in our own lives, you know, there is that part of the story.
Yeah, the way it plays out, of course, is it's so inadequate when we believe we only have two choices, the right one and the wrong one. I mean, even in school, we were not limited to true or false. We had multiple choice. And
which were often confusing.
Yeah, well, they were intended to be confusing, you know, to plumb the depths of your knowledge. And you also had none of the above and all of the above. And my favorite was the instructor that would say, warning, caution, there is more than one right answer, and you must find the best right answer. And boy, that always put me back on my heels. What do you mean, the best right answer? Because I had been educated and enculturated to believe there was only one right answer. The church was very clear about that. So what do you mean? There's a middle way, there's a third option and a fourth possibility? And we're moving into some dangerous territory here. You know, what happens to the church if it loses its authority to determine what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah, you're in danger of thinking for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And we won't have any of that now, will we? Nevertheless, I'm not anti-church or anti-organized religion. I think it's a very nice stepping stone. It's an introduction to virtue, ethics, morality, metaphysics. It's elementary school, and there's good teachers and bad teachers, but there's just more. We can think for ourselves. We're evolving. The abilities that we have with computers and technology, it just boggles my mind watching these rockets return to Earth and land on their tails. By the way, people give Elon Musk credit for that. He's the banker. He didn't invent any of that. He's just a banker. I don't think we should go overboard in giving Musk credit for, oh, he's so brilliant. PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, what a brilliant science. No, he's just a banker, You can see with Twitter falling apart what kind of manager he is. I guess he's going to bring Trump back now. That's what they say. So we'll see. Elon Musk, an adventure unfolding before us.
God have mercy.
An adventure in narcissism. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks.
And
Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. Patrick.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Last couple of weeks, I was driving through cities. I was like, wait, I got stuff to say, but can't really do it when I'm driving. So, so a couple comments and a question. You just mentioned the person's name. I was going to try to stay away from political, but when I try to verbalize a bad word for this guy, I'd come to scum, and I'm like, wait a second, that's an insult to scum, because scum in the gutter is just being scum. It's not doing anything, malicious. And so I couldn't use scum for the guy,
You
But,
demean scum. Let me interrupt you at this point. I'm going to spare you I'll come back to you, I promise. It is possible, in fact, it's quite easy once you've considered it, to discuss the presence of Donald Trump and his supporters in a completely non-political way. I frankly have very little interest in politics, but I'm a journalist. I'm an absolute news junkie. And CNN, MSNBC, we even watch Fox, but can only tolerate it for a few minutes at a time. But we expose ourselves to it because we want to see what they're up to. And being a radio talk show guy for 54 years before recently retiring, I also listen to hate radio, AM hate radio. I want to hear what these guys are up to. I just don't immerse myself in it. And outside of this, we have lives, of course. It's not the only thing that we do. But my view, my understanding of what Trump triggers in us, beyond the obvious fear that we find so revolting and disgusting, nobody enjoys being frightened. What I keep coming back to is just simple lack of morality, a complete absence of any desire at all to be virtuous, and further to exploit that, to be a mouthpiece, to gather the worst kind of power by organizing terrified people and promoting that fear. It's as if he's a minister of fear. Remember, Gandhi said, fear is the enemy. We think it is hatred and anger, but it's actually fear. Because that's the source of anger, that's the source of hatred, that's the source of racism, sexism, bigotry, xenophobia, the terror of the other, which is really a terror around ignorance. So what's terrifying us about these people is their willingness to promote fear and ignorance, to exploit that for money and power. And the truth is, there's something more powerful than the power of the world and money, or authority and money. And that, of course, is wisdom, love, truth, goodness, beauty. But it's not so obvious. These are subtle, esoteric values that we have to be mature and relatively safe to perceive, to conceive, to perceive, to comprehend, much less to embody. So when my mind is dragged into being frightened by the ultra-right, the neo-Nazis, the Proud Boys, whatever these militant, non-democratic organizations, I try to pull on my compassion for their ignorance and their fear, recognizing what we rarely consider, which is how frightened they are. Trump is terrified, tormented, tortured, but it's so familiar. And that's what he wants, is to garner that kind of power, that kind of celebrity, due to a mental illness, a personality disorder called narcissism, with elements of paranoia. You trust me, you do not want to live in that guy's head. It would be a horrible place. And I think we need to come to compassion and an understanding of the role that this indecency plays, just like Jack and I were talking about light and dark, the way adversity promotes redemption and healing and expanded awareness and consciousness. Sometimes we have to be exposed to what we don't want and what we fear in order to turn and say, there's got to be something better than this, right? So there's nothing political about that. There's really nothing political about Trump. What is their agenda? They just ran on crime, inflation, and the border. And when they found out they won the House, if not the Senate, by a slim majority, still not sure exactly by what, we don't know the count even yet, but they're going to have a slim majority in the House. And what have they said they're going to do to reduce crime, inflation, and the border problem? Absolutely nothing. They're going to have hearings on old Dr. Fauci, an 80-year-old man who served this country, not just through the COVID thing, but he was a leading administrator in our battle against AIDS. That's where he was best known for his contribution in fighting AIDS. They're going to impeach Joe Biden, of course. The Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden had a laptop. We don't know what's on it, but it's got to tie him to some kind of espionage with China and all of this stuff. It's just stoking fear. It's not political. They don't have laws that they want to pass. There's not legislation pending. It's just anti-this, anti-that, destroy. There's really nothing political about the right. So that's
no, you're
my
right.
that's my
You're
2
right.
cents worth.
That's perfect, because I said political because it's just that whole paintbrush. But you're right. Me and my daughter, she's 14 now, but 12, 13, and we're in Oklahoma for the COVID because they didn't believe in it. So I found a lot of work over there. My dad's there, but I said, well, what's the worst part about Tulsa? And she just looked at me and said, too many Trump people.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we just realized if they're supporting Trump, something's wrong. Something's wrong. That, I mean, I say wrong because it doesn't align with our values and viewpoints, but it's just so off the rail. And I always said, thank God for Trump, because he's like the Pied Piper that brought out. I did use the words cockroaches. He's a Pied Piper of cockroaches, but cockroaches are sacred, and it demeans cockroaches. But so along those lines, but what this class has really helped me is start to understand that instead of throwing back the ball of hate that they throw out, is catch the ball and look at it and just understand that that's fear that they're throwing out.
exactly. Anger, hatred, violence is all rooted in fear, and fear is intimately involved with ignorance. Fear comes out of what you do not understand, but promotes confusion and ignorance, which feeds the fear, which feeds the ignorance. It's a vicious cycle. We need to have compassion for our GOP neighbors, because if we got together with the most hardcore Trumper and had dinner or sat down and had a beer or a glass of wine or whatever, as long as we didn't talk politics, we would get along just fine. We'd find them to be perfectly decent people who love their children and their grandchildren. They're just terrified of what they don't know. Look at those maps that the TV news people put up. The only blue part in America are the coasts, which are the most well-educated and prosperous people, where most of the professionals are. And so when you see the interior, the heartland, so-called, of America, this solid ruby red color, remember two things. Number one, if it's red, it only means 51% or more. It doesn't mean they're all Republicans. And number two, well, I guess that's the same thing. I know. Lost it there for a second. The second point I wanted to make was those states are almost empty. Like Wyoming, are you kidding? South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. Add those people together, you don't even have LA. Right?
They get 2 senators.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
That's crazy.
The Dakota territory gets 4 because they divided them in half. Yeah, it is crazy, but it's the way it was set up. I don't know if that'll ever change. It's best not to be political, though be concerned just from a psychological or spiritual viewpoint. I don't want to say struggling against, but what we need to be aware of is that there is an alternative to allowing yourself to be dominated by fear and confusion and the nasty, indecent, immoral. The antidote is just kindness. All you got to do is be kind and understanding and forgiving. Watch your back. Some of these folks are really dangerous. But
I'm just hoping truth and light prevail, because with what you just listed of the indecency and this type of things, it can't stand if I want truth to win out. It's all about the badness can't stand test of time. It's the truth and love that's going to conquer. I hope that's what I'm hoping for.
Christ said the poor will always be with you. And I think those who are ignorant and confused, ignorant is a really insulting word, but believe me, I've really searched every thesaurus. There are not a lot of words for unawareness, confusion, ignorance, misinformed, disinformed. Just not a whole lot of words for for being ignorant. Stupid, that's very insulting. These people are not stupid. They don't, ignorance doesn't mean you lack the capacity to understand. It just means you're not using that information. You're ignoring it. You know, an
Lack of
ignorant
knowledge.
well, a lack of knowledge or a refusal to acknowledge that the word knowledge is in acknowledge, isn't it? Uh, the lack of willingness to acknowledge that information, to ignore it, to turn away from it. That's what ignorance is. It doesn't mean you're stupid or, well, even stupid means stupefy, deer in the headlights. But the connotations of the word are such that they're just, you can't use these words often in everyday language. They're too insulting. But be that as it may.
Many years ago, my dad, I said ignorant, and he got offended, and he says, I don't like that word. And he says, I don't even think you know what it means. And I said, well, I thought about it. And I said, to me, it means lack of knowledge. He went home and looked in the dictionary and showed me lack of knowledge.
Ignorant. Yeah, the Latin ig means the absence of knowledge. Gnosis, knowledge. Ignorant. Yeah, to ignore. Yeah. Okay, I just think I appreciate you bringing it up because we never talk politics here, yet I don't think we should be afraid to discuss current events and prevailing moods in the society from a spiritual point of view. And so I'm glad you brought it up and gave me an opportunity to address that. Where are you, by the way? Where are you driving?
Salt Lake.
Ah, beautiful city.
I was 2 days ago, I was down at the border of Mexico and by TJ. And then I went over to Yuma and then up here to Salt Lake and now back to San Leandro up in the Bay Area.
Excellent. That's beautiful. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay,
Have a happy
Michael.
Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. And I wish all
You
of
too.
you a happy Thanksgiving. And gosh, I just so enjoy this class. I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to do this, for your willingness to be here live when you can, to view this class in its entirety on our YouTube channel, Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. The audio is podcast on all platforms to all players and apps. Again, search Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. And if you ever want to help us out, make a little donation to help defer the internet costs. They are substantial. You can go to wisdomofthesoul.school. No .com, no .org, no .net. Wisdomofthesoul.school. And that's a good place to send your friends if you want them to see a little introductory video about this class and a little bio about who I am, and a coupon where you can put your email address and get the newsletter. Wisdomofthesoul.school. All right. Again, I wish you the happiest of Thanksgivings. We will be here next week. You know, we're going to take a couple of weeks off at the end of the year. Christmas and New Year's Day, I think both are Sundays. So we're not going to meet then. But right up until then, we'll be here every Sunday. And of course, in the new year, we may have a new URL, a new link. I'm not sure if I can extend Zoom with this same link. So make sure you're getting the newsletter so that web link doesn't expire. Again, Namaste, my friends. Aloha, Salam. And please unmute and say so long. And goodbye to all of your friends here. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
So long. Thank
Michael,
you. Thank you, everyone else.
Grateful for what you
Bye.
did.
See you next week.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.